Today, we are very pleased to welcome Mr. Frank Hart, President, Managing Director, and Chief Risk Officer of Greystone Managed Investments, who will be presenting today on behalf of the Institute of Certified Management Consultants of Saskatchewan. Our province is in the midst of unprecedented growth and is at the top of the country in terms of economic indicators. How did we get here? What are the benefits and what should be done to sustain? The Institute of Certified Management Consultants of Saskatchewan undertook a survey and a bunch of other research to examine these important questions and conducted 30 interviews with business leaders throughout the province. Presentations are also being done today in Moose Jaw, North Battleford, Prince Albert, Saskatoon, Swift Current, and of course right here in the King City. So without further ado, welcome Mr. Frank Hart.
Thank you, John, and thanks to all of you for coming out today to hear this presentation. We've had a great partnership through this project with the Chamber, Saskatchewan, and Saskatoon Chambers, other chambers around the province. And this is, in fact, as John indicated, I think the first time we've actually done a simultaneous launch of the same presentation for the chambers across the province. So it's been a great partnership with the chambers, as I say, and thanks, John, for having us here today. It's my pleasure to be one on behalf of the Institute who gets to share the results of this study with you. We undertook this study, a number of firms that I'll talk about in a minute, but a key partner in this was also, in addition to the Chamber, the Regina Economic Development, Regina Regional Opportunities Corporation, rather, I keep using the old name, and the Saskatoon Regional Economic Development Authority. We're very much a part of this. And Johnson Cheyenne Graduate School of Public Policy, Doug Elliott, who you've all read about and seen his statistics here and there, has been a major contributor to this. And thanks, Doug, for all your help. This is the 50th anniversary of the CMC designation, and so we decided to undertake this project kind of as our gift and thanks for all the business that consultants have had over the years, and so here we are today. As I mentioned, there are a number of chambers that have worked with us on this, and we're very pleased to have this ongoing partnership with the chambers of commerce across the province. You might ask, what is a CMC? The CMC is the World Premier Management Consulting Certification. It's recognized in 50 countries around the world. Many CMCs are also chartered accountants, certified management accountants, all, I guess, about to become one in the fullness of time here, neurologists, engineers, project managers, HR professionals, finance experts, etc. But the CMC designation is one that sort of overarches those and is a general management certification that many of those other professional designations also use. So as John indicated, our focus on this is to kind of understand what's happened in the Saskatchewan economy and what do we do to sustain the good things that have been going on. This slide just gives you a quick counting of some of the firms that have been contributors to this study. So these are all CMC member firms. Many of them are here today. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank their support for this, as well as the other partners I've mentioned. So in the interest of time, get right down to the details. Cam Cooper's in the audience, and Cam from Praxis and Val Sleuth are both here from that firm that did the opinion research for this study. And Cam surveyed, I think, almost 1,000 sample in Saskatchewan, asking them a number of opinions on attitudes towards growth. And one of the interesting things about the study was, for those of us who've been around the economic development game in Saskatchewan for a number of years, how much has really changed in the province in terms of attitude. So if you ask this kind of question, let's consider Saskatchewan the next 4 years, and how do you expect Saskatchewan's economy will perform, and how do you think you'll do? Well, the good news is 85% of people think that what we're in now is the new normal, that we'll either continue to do at least as well, if not better, in the next 4 or 5 years than we've done in the past. And if you were to talk to Cam, he would tell you that if you asked the same question, 10 years ago, you could have put a different answer, which would be, I think I'm going to be okay, but I don't think the province is going to do very well, and I don't think my neighbors are going to do very well. So there's really a fullness of attitude in terms of being very positive about the province's future and what's going on today. And so this is kind of settling in as almost the new normal in Saskatchewan. And that's one of the things that I think is a great opportunity for us, because it's now time in our view to take advantage of that. But it also is something to be careful about, because if we've set our expectations as high, if things start to turn the other way on us, how resilient are we? And how quickly will we go back to those old negative attitudes that we've known for so many years? The other thing that we found in the survey that Cam did was that the attitudes toward business are very refreshingly positive, and I think this is a bit of encouraging news for chamber members, because 40% of people say actually the idea of owning or of being my own business appeals to me, and most people, like 80%, think that businesses have a positive influence on Saskatchewan, and that we all gain when businesses do well. So the province is very business friendly, I would say, and that's encouraging to see, and another great opportunity to play on now. And we sort of, when we sat as a group of consultants trying to go through this data that Doug and others had put together, and what does it really mean in attitudes? I think it kind of for us it harkened back to what it must have been like in 1905, prior to the Depression in Saskatchewan, where people were moving here from Europe, they were getting farmland, they were coming here to live a better life, they were outward looking, more confident. There was population growth, immigration was welcome, that kind of thing. It was very much communities working together to make a better life, those kinds of things, and very much a positive attitude. And then I think the Depression, in our view, had a pretty big psychological impact on the province, and we ended up in a situation where people got a scarcity mentality. If I do better, somebody else is doing worse, or if I'm not doing as well, it's because somebody else is doing better. Very high dependency on everything had to be done by government, that kind of thing. And we have seen the reverse of that now, where once again we're entrepreneurial, people are looking more globally. We see the kind of tremendous impacts organizations like STEP and others have made in the province over the years. The growth of exports being outstandingly strong. The thing you're talking about, the world need, what we have, the amount of immigration cities like Regina and Saskatchewan have seen from not just other provinces, but in fact other countries. So, and the whole population growth has just changed a lot of the attitudes, and I think restored to, the attitude set to where we were probably back in the early part of the last century when people were coming here and were very positive. So, then we ask ourselves, well, what's driving these changes in attitudes? Why are people so much more optimistic? And our view is that the fundamental reason is that if you put more money in people's pockets, they tend to be happier. And so I don't know why that is, but it just is. I feel that way myself, But what's causing this is this thing called a commodity super cycle. So there have been 4 of these or so in the last 100+ years. The most recent one, prior to the one we're in, was in the 70s. And Saskatchewan did have population growth. And so if you overlay the sort of the period of the economic commodity super cycle, which is really driven by periods when the world economy is growing more rapidly and needs raw materials and drives commodity prices up, our population has tracked that pretty much. So we did see population increases in the 80s, in the late 70s and 80s as a consequence of that resource boom then, and we're seeing it even more dramatically this time because this is a stronger commodity cycle than we've seen before. And we actually think that there's some real evidence that this one could be long and strong, in the sense that there's probably about $17 trillion of new investment required just to replace the existing mine and resource sector that needs to be replaced in terms of materials, oil and gas, those kinds of things, and meet the demand for about 2 billion more people. So, the fundamentals are very strong for us, and so this is a great opportunity for us to continue to take advantage of this super cycle. And what happens in those situations is that buoyant economic times increase the level of optimism, and optimism increases the amount of investment people want to make, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy or vital cycle. And when you look at the last number of years, Saskatchewan's actually had, as John indicated, very strong GDP growth. We've been actually in relative terms growing much faster than Alberta, which has had a very strong period during this time as well. What we haven't done as well, as you can see on this chart in the dark, in the blue and the brown bars, is that we haven't generated as much employment or as much population growth relative to Alberta. And the reason for that, we think, is because we're still doing too much of the pure commodity stuff and not enough of the value added associated with the inputs to the mining sector, the oil and gas sector, or the processing of food products and that kind of thing. So those are big opportunities that we think need to happen in Saskatchewan in order to help sustain the growth, because commodity prices will always go up and down. And so we think that part of filling that gap is really to focus on those industries, and that's nothing new. I mean, everybody's talked about it in Saskatchewan for a long time, but I don't think we've ever had a period where there's been so much interest in investing in these sectors as we have today. And so the boom has really been created by this growth of commodity demand globally, the demand for natural resource production and exports, which we've met, and a lot of construction activity associated with not only the mines and the investments in the oil patch and so forth, but also just a higher level of capital spending generally in terms of housing and all of that creates in the community, new office buildings, et cetera, et cetera. And you see incomes have risen, so this looks at incomes, I think, from 2000 to 2010 or something like that. Yeah, it's just on the chart there. And you can see Estevan, for example, how much the average income has grown in the city of Estevan in that area as a result of the oil patch there. But Regina's done well. Every community in this city has done well. And rural Saskatchewan has done as well. So rural incomes are also up. So everybody's winning in the whole income game, and that actually helps drive optimism a lot as well. We've actually done very well in the employment growth area too, because Saskatoon, for this period of time, which is 2006 to 2011, was the leading city in terms of growth of employment, followed by Edmonton and then by Regina. And I think, if I think back, Larry, when you first started at your old role at the Opportunities Commission, that being able to say that someday Regina and Saskatoon would surpass Calgary in terms of employment growth, they'd kind of lock you up and put you in a white jacket or something like that. But this is really what's happened in the province, and so it's very remarkable. And the other thing about this is that the shift in terms of people deriving income from employment as opposed to income from government transfers has really shifted positively. So a lot more people are getting their income from jobs and that kind of thing, less dependency on government transfers, which is a very positive thing for the economy as well. And so Regina and Saskatoon have done very well in the grand scheme of things. And the exports have been a big contributor to that. And what we've observed is that this is really a dynamic that interplays between urban and rural Saskatchewan, where the commodities are produced in rural Saskatchewan, but the investment in jobs and in terms of hiring and services and construction and all that kind of thing is largely happening in the cities. And so, one without the other wouldn't stand it, but the two legs of the stool make it a lot more stable. And so it's really that partnership that we're advocating going forward, and how to make that partnership even more effective is the secret to continuing this good news that we've been enjoying for the last number of years. So what's the benefit from this growth, and how is it translated? Well, I've kind of indicated this a bit, but Saskatchewan is typically seen as a rural province, but actually the majority of people live in the 8 centers and the 8 largest centers. And a lot more people are coming to those 8 largest centers in terms of the population growth than rural areas. So rural Saskatchewan continues to be flat to declining in population, and the urban areas are growing, but incomes are rising in the rural areas. So it's not all bad for the rural areas. And there are unique challenges in the city as a consequence of this tremendous growth, because they've got not only the infrastructure legacy that they haven't been able to catch up to, but you've got this new growth that's happening as a result of the activity in the province. And that's putting even more demand for infrastructure spending on the cities. And so they've got kind of a double whammy going on at the same time. Saskatoon and Regina are en route to becoming cities of about 300,000. When you look at the greater trading area, Saskatoon's getting very close to that now when you add in Mormon and Martinsville and so forth. Regina is doing much better, I think, and if we had actually a couple more years of data more recent on this, I think Doug and I were musing that Regina would actually look even better than it does here today. So it's really closed the gap with Saskatoon by quite a bit. But you know, the dynamic of how population and the importance of urban areas, and if we kind of tend to measure our success, if there's one number I think people tend to use in the province to say, are we doing better or worse, it's population. Because when we saw the kids move out to other places, we got a very negative view about what the future was. But when the population starts to grow, then people feel much more positive about it. And the dynamic of how the population is actually changing in the province is really unique, because if you look at this chart, for example, you can see cities of, Meadow Lake, Moosomin, roughly the same size, but because they're not in close proximity to a major urban center, they're not growing. They're not growing as much. They're growing, but they're just not growing as fast as a White City or a Martinsville or a Balgonie or something like that that's close to an urban center where you get the benefit of small town living, but you've got the employment opportunities for both spouses nearby. That's really a kind of a key thing about why we think bigger urban centers are going to be more critical in the future to drive our growth going forward. Pretty much all of the job growth has been in urban Saskatchewan, and when we define urban, we kind of define it with these cities listed there. Weyburn doesn't quite make it in statistic terms from Stats Canada view of an urban center, so actually you could argue that there's even more urban population when you put Weyburn in the mix, but rural Saskatchewan has actually still lost a little bit of population, but the growth of population has been all in the cities. And the reason for that is it's just the business economics of the way life works. If you're going to open a business and run a business, you need access to good supply of skilled labor, you need the services nearby, those kinds of things. Workers want to locate where they can get good education for their children. If they have special needs children, they need to be near a bigger center, so forth. So cities have an advantage in this regard just because of the economies of scale, and that's just kind of the laws of economics. And rural Saskatchewan also fights the challenge in terms of employment that their industries are commodity industries, and usually what Saskatchewan and other places that have done well in the commodity sector have done extremely well is that they've improved the productivity a lot, so it takes a lot fewer people to do, to produce a ton of potash in a mine than it used to, or to produce a bushel of grain or a ton of grain. So, the economics tend to work in favor of the cities getting employment and against the rural areas, but the partnership of that dynamic is still very vital to the growth of the province, so both of them have an equally important role to play going forward. The other thing that we found in the study was, particularly amongst the 30 or so business leaders that we interviewed, was surprisingly a lot of them said, now that we're into this hot economy, we're having to recruit people to come here. Regina and Saskatoon are sort of the minimum offer. So we really need to ramp up our focus on cultural industries, better restaurants, more entertainment, better recreation, those kinds of things all become very important features to draw people to the province. And so that's also something that we see as being very important as part of an urban agenda to help growth, is to focus on those cultural industries because they are unique to urban areas and big draws for people to consider when they want to move someplace. And this just repeats a point I made earlier, which is that, even in mining, for example, or oil and gas, which you tend to think is a rural area, people would say, well, there are no oil wells on Elgin Street. But the reality is, even in that industry, you can see from this chart with the red arrow points that there's still actually quite a bit of the oil and gas employment is in the city. And you talked to BHP Billiton, which we did. I think they had 300 people or so at the mine site and 400 people in downtown Saskatoon. So even though it's a rural-based industry in terms of where the product is coming from, the services associated with the headquarters, all that kind of thing tends to be in a bigger area. And without larger cities, those headquarters could easily be in Calgary as opposed to Saskatoon. So we think that the agenda to keep growing the cities is important for the province overall. And it also adds better services for the rural areas, because the larger the city is, the more extensive these healthcare specialists are going to be, the better air connections are going to be, the more opportunities for education, for secondary education are going to exist. So it's really that partnership that we think needs to be sustained and talked about. Agriculture is still, it's the industry that has the dominant employment in rural Saskatchewan and always will be, but we think there's really unique opportunity for regional centers like Yorkton, Swift Current, North Battleford, et cetera, to add a lot more value in those sectors. And so even those cities will grow as a result of the agriculture and industry around them, and there's a lot more potential to do that. So in summary, the exports originate from rural Saskatchewan. Rural Saskatchewan contributes about 44% of the provincial GDP, actually about the same as Regina and Saskatoon do on a combined basis. But the extensive employment in agriculture, forestry, based on the resource sector, is driving a lot of the exports. But a lot of the employment for those industries is still in the cities. And the cities are vital to growth because we think that the support services needed to drive the growth of those resource industries even is going to be in the cities. A lot of the value-added processing or supply chain development associated with those industries is going to be in one of these 8 cities in the province. And the population increase, if we want to continue to attract people to Saskatchewan, they're going to tend to want to live in the large urban centers as opposed to the rural centers. That's not true for everybody. There will always still be people who want a rural lifestyle. But by and large, the weight of the population is going to migrate to the urban centers. So here's the big question. What do we need to do to sustain this growth and ensure it continues in the future? Somebody reminded us of this bumper sticker from Alberta from years ago, which is, dear Lord, just give me one more boom and I promise not to piss it away like I did the others. And so, I kind of think it's another lesson to us. We actually think there's a lot that can be learned from Alberta and what it's gone through and that is relevant to Saskatchewan. It's not that we do everything the same way, but it's a province that very similar to ours that's gone through some of these kinds of things, and it happens to be 10, 15 years further down the road than we are. So it's a bit of a template that we think is worth doing or worth considering. And just to bring this chart back again, the evidence of it, we think, is the more intensive you have the supply chain and the value added, the more productivity you get out in terms of job growth and population growth for each percentage point of GDP increase. So that's really why we think that this focus on value added and this focus on urban center development is a key piece of the puzzle to sustain the growth. An example of that would be the Strathcona County around Edmonton. If you've driven through there with the petrochemical infrastructure and that kind of thing, it's 47 billion of GDP, and what are we in Saskatchewan, 70 billion for the whole province? So, that little area in that county is over half what Saskatchewan's total GDP is. So it just speaks to the kind of intensity you can get when you get focused on value-added production. What can we do to see the growth continue? We think cities of 500,000 as a benchmark to strive for are worth serious consideration. And at the regional planning summit that the Army Sherwood and the city of Regina hosted last November, I think it was, I think Mark Partridge was there, an academic who's done a lot of work on the U.S. Midwest, where the economic conditions have paralleled that of Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta for quite a while. And what he found was that cities that had a 500,000 or greater population really didn't experience the migration at all. So there's a critical mass associated with getting to 500,000. We think we're within shooting distance of that in Regina and Saskatoon. And the interim step, we would argue, is to think of it more regionally. So Regina with White City, with Emerald Park, with Belgoni, with Regina Beach, Lumsden, that kind of thing together. Similarly in Saskatoon. Because we think that sustaining the growth will require a focus on building larger urban centers. Business leaders we talked to saw 4 major challenges. None of these I think will be a surprise to you. One is obviously getting access to the skilled labor and professionals that we need, improving the growth enabling infrastructure. We've heard a lot about that. Addressing the rising cost of living and doing business, especially for businesses that have kind of national level economies, but are dealing with the rising costs here locally and can't get those same prices in the market. So the phone business, for example, in Saskatchewan, phone pricing tends to be kind of pretty standard across the country. You've got rising costs here, but you can only charge what is seen as reasonable fee across the country for phone service. and continuing to improve and evolve the policy environment. You know, our view is we did a sort of a good review of the province's Vision 2020 document, and I'd say, you know, it's at least 80% right in terms of hitting all the right things. It's probably not as specific as it could be on urban center development or value-added processing. It's fairly light on that, so we would encourage them to sort of focus a bit more, but generally the policy is well crafted, we think. Addressing these challenges in an urban-based agenda is important because, as I said earlier, it attracts the skilled trades, persons, professionals, etc., and it addresses the infrastructure that the province needs to continue to grow. And creating local economies with sufficient scale is important to support growing businesses. So here's a little kind of demonstration to see what Regina could evolve like, and this is courtesy of one of our consultants who worked on this. So there's Regina today. This is our population footprint. We had 100,000 people, it looks like that. Go to 300,000, it looks like that. 500,000 like that. And then you start to see the growth of the areas around Regina in terms of Regina Beach, Lumsden, the Arm, Sherwood, all that kind of thing. So, you know, the vision is you'll see a lot more intensive rural areas, so more acreages, all those kinds of things around Regina and Saskatoon, much like you see around Calgary, Edmonton today. And similarly for Saskatoon. Actually, Saskatoon's spread out a little more than Regina. Regina is more densely populated, we found, when we did this work. But we think that there's a number of opportunities here that could be explored. You know, a Saskatoon-Prince Albert corridor, a Yellowhead Highway, kind of Yorkton to Lloydminster, Regina, Saskatoon, you know, things like the cities are talking about an accord between Regina and Saskatoon, so should Saskatoon focus more on the mining industry as its kind of core development, should Regina concentrate on the oil and gas sector? We think those kind of dialogues are really important, and we think there's a real opportunity to start doing that now. So what we've tried to prescribe, and will be prescribing through this process with the chambers, is we think communities need to be the focus of this effort. This is not a recommendation to the provincial government to drop what it's doing and focus on this. I think we think the provincial government's a key partner in this, but it really needs to be driven by the local communities, and we think the vibrancy is now there in those communities to do it, but they need to figure out what they want to be and focus on those areas that they can do well. Plan for growth and change. We think environmental issues are important to integrate into planning, because at the end of the day, when we're a city of 500,000, we want to be a more livable city than we are today. We think that the growth has to be looked at in the sense that there's opportunities for all this whole debate that's happening around the income disparities is a worrisome issue, and I think that, you know, cities need to tackle that to make sure we have affordable housing and those kinds of things. Cities need to obviously rigorously manage costs, because there's a lot of money that needs to be spent here, and you can easily see things getting out of control. But the real operative word is a partnership between rural and urban areas. And so we want to communicate these challenges, mobilize leaders in the community, and create a sense of urgency that while the good times are here, it's way easier to do than if we wait for bad times to come back and then try to do it. So I'll stop there in case there are a few questions, John, and thanks for your attention. And I'd particularly like to thank the boys from Duke Thuringer for not throwing buttons at me, because they tried to do that earlier.
I didn't get any question cards. Does anybody have a question card? No? Let me just ask you one question. GPH, how that's evolved, is that more of what we need to be doing in terms of advertising value, diversifying the economy somewhat?
Yeah. Good question, absolutely. You know, we really endorse what's going on there. You know, Larry, you were very much involved in the start of that. You know, it came out of a group of ag industries here that said, you know, we got a problem trying to compete because we can't get containers, and that's sort of led to the building of the GTH. And so it's a great opportunity to infill with more logistics services, and I think Regina, as a consequence of that, has a real fighting chance of being a strong logistics center, which will support the whole economy. It's a great example of doing the kind of thing we think needs to happen in terms of thinking big, you know, as opposed to just saying, woe is me, we can't get enough containers, and so I guess we'll have to locate someplace else.